we're going to be talking about the grooming gang scandal. Let's be honest, rape gangs that have been plaguing our towns and our cities across the United Kingdom, and how the Labour Party under Yvette Cooper has come up with one of the weakest ideas in the history of Home Secretaries, which is to have some pathetic, measly, mild inquiry that will last a matter of 3 months, that will only cover 5 of the 50 towns that have been listed, that will only cost 10 million when Telford on its own cost £8 million, will not be a national inquiry, and the victims are outraged, most importantly, because there will be no ability to force witnesses to come before these inquiries. That means, let's be perfectly frank, police officers, counsellors, social workers, God forbid teachers, who were all aware or knew what was going on, yet turned a blind eye or chose not to take action in the interests of not upsetting a certain demographic in this country, predominantly British Pakistanis who were involved in these grooming gangs, all in the interest of making sure that we worried about the diversity, equality and agenda over the interests of keeping predominantly young white British girls safe on the streets of our communities, is an absolute outrage and something that disgusts me. And I know Ben Habib has been making a lot of noise about this. So Ben, I know you're joining us down the line. How are you, sir?
Very well indeed, thank you, Jonathan. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Ben. Now, Ben, what did you make? I was being pretty harsh there. Maybe you think I've been unfair, or maybe you think I've not been hard enough. What do you make of Yvette Cooper's sellout to the victims of these rape gangs?
I thought your description was absolutely right. Perhaps the only other thing I would add, a couple of things I would add to it, is there is no emphasis, as far as I can see in the terms of reference of the, I think she's setting up 5 different inquiries, no requirement for those inquiries to look at what it was in our institutional framework that enabled these rape gangs, as you rightly call them, to go about doing what they did without being challenged. How it is that the police forces, the various police forces, the social services, the local councils, teachers, medical services, didn't stand up and blow the whistle on what must have been self-evidently going on. And that's absent from the terms of references. And whilst, of course, it's important to shine a light on the ethnicity of these people and to speak about that without fear or favour, to understand what it is about the multicultural divide, the many multicultural divides in our country now that are creating pockets of perhaps culturally driven bad behaviour. What's equally important, and you touched on it, is that the diversity, the drive towards diversity, shouldn't be used as a cloak to prevent those who should have been protecting these young girls from being brought to account. And that is conspicuously absent from the terms of reference. That's the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing I'd say is, you know, if you're going to chuck 10 million quid in, I think it's 5 million to start with, you know, it's not going to go very far if you've got 5 different inquiries, all doubling up, doing the same thing, same level of overhead, without, you know, using economies of scale that come from a larger inquiry. The COVID inquiry cost 350 million quid. Do they think they're going to get to the bottom of decades of gang raping, gang raping, gang behaviour, that's correct, by setting up 5 independent inquiries with £1 million each? They're not going to do it. And of course, then the public start thinking, as I do, as I'm sure you do, is why the devil aren't they facing up to this reality? Are they ideologically hijacked and unable to really dispense criminal justice in the way that it should be blindly? Or are they running scared of something else? You know, why is it that our young girls in this country are not going to get the proper light shone on this horrendous issue? Well,
Ben, I think you've hit a lot of points there that I completely concur with. I mean, my biggest frustration in all this is that Labour has been so busy talking about Elon Musk and trying to make this some online spat, rather than actually understand that the anger of the British public, and particularly the anger, most importantly, of the victims, is that whilst the perpetrators in some cases have been arrested and have been sentenced, albeit not for long enough, and they should have been deported in many cases for those who are foreign national offenders or hold dual nationality, the truth of the matter is, as you say, it's the cover-up here. It's the fact that we know there are people in our institutions, in our establishment, who turned a blind eye, neglected their responsibilities and their duties to protect people, and most importantly, once again, are now looking after themselves, walking away with big, hefty, gold-plated public sector pensions, rather than face the justice that they deserve, or sorry, that they need to face, so the victims get the justice that they deserve. I'm absolutely appalled, and yet again, it's no shock to me that the establishment is doing everything it can, and why Labour is getting busy into a row with Elon Musk, who I think, by the way, is a hero for having raised this issue and for forcing the government into this position. Don't you agree with me that I think it was Chris Bryant, the minister, that has admitted that it was Elon Musk that forced this government to take action? Why is it taking a immigrant to America from South African heritage who just happens to own a social media platform to force the UK government to take seriously these rape gangs?
Absolutely, and he's absolutely right to have done it. Delighted he's done it, and I hope he shines a light through that medium on other atrocities and difficulties and failures of our own government. I mean, this is one of the great things, I'm digressing slightly, but it's one of the great things about the change of governance that we're now going to see across the Atlantic. They're going to do away with DEI and progressive discrimination and all the crazy net zero agenda, no borders. They're going to do away with all of that. There's going to be a dramatic change in the way the United States is governed. And we better get on the same boat. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind and economically left in a backwater, not to mention, you know, from an ideological perspective, whether the US will even see us as an equal partner. I mean, again, I just want to mention something that's really interesting to me. I read a bit about Herma today. You probably know more about Herma, the Attorney General appointed by the Labour Party to that office. This is a man who's got a senior position in our criminal justice system, the ability to bring cases against people, who defended Jerry Adams, who defended people who were illegal migrants who were claiming to be younger than they are. And yet he and also turning civil cases into criminal cases, politically charged. You know, how can we have a settled British society if our society can't be confident that our criminal justice system works blindly? It has to work blindly. It can't be politically discriminatory. It can't discriminate either negatively or positively in favor of a certain group of people. But that is what we are seeing repeatedly out of our criminal justice system. So I'm absolutely glad, coming around full circle, that Elon Musk has shone a light on this.
Well, Ben, before I come back to you, I was going to bring back in Councillor Daniel Jellyman from Stoke-on-Trent City Council, obviously former deputy leader of that local authority when the Conservatives were controlling it. Daniel, Stoke-on-Trent is mentioned in numerous local inquiries as an area you yourself have served on panels where I know you've raised particular questions, particularly around taxi drivers. Are you appalled that it's being led to local authorities like Stoke-on-Trent, for example, to, if they want to have an inquiry, rather than the government just take firm action in an area that we know will have a large amount of deprived white English girls who will be, sadly, the type of victims that would be preyed on from particularly Telford and other areas, Rochdale, which are not far from our city?
Well, the key thing here is these cities are linked. A lot of the grooming and the gangs that go on, they're not just isolated in one city, they cross borders. We hear about the drugs crossing borders, these poor girls which are being trafficked across local authority boundaries. So it's poor practice just to say the local authority should look at this, or we should have locally led inquiries. It's a national problem. These girls are transported and boys are transported across boundaries. You can't just leave it down to local councils to lead on this, particularly when local councils are finding it even more and more difficult to do everyday services because the government continues to cut funding.
And what's your view, Daniel, as well about the inability to compel witnesses? I mean, surely it makes a mockery if you're having to ask but can't demand that people face questions. Do you worry that within our establishment, within our institutions, there is now a big cover-up going on, in fact, that people are looking after their own backs in this case rather than actually getting the answers that these victims deserve?
Oh, absolutely. And we saw this with the Post Office, didn't we? And that's now led to a national inquiry, and we're seeing what's coming out of that. The same will happen if we have a national inquiry about grooming gangs. There's loads of institutions caught up in this, from the police to local authorities to social care to the courts. I've served on the licensing panel on the City Council where we looked at taxi drivers' licences, and we've revoked licences from people that were quite clearly engaged in illegal behaviour in this nature, only for the courts to give them their licence back.
I mean, Ben, that must be shocking to hear that a sitting councillor has actually tried to take action, tried to take away the ability of these people to access these girls that are being raped, and yet courts have worked against the interest and the mission of the council, the values of the council. Ben, do you think there's a big cover-up going on here? I know people will quickly say, oh, this is some sort of conspiracy theory on the left.
No,
it's not, though, is
conspiracy. It's not conspiracy theory. I mean, we see two-tier justice in practice all the time. The two Manchester airport chaps have only just been arrested, whereas after the Southport protests, you know, Keir Starmer got up, categorised everyone as far right, and instructed the criminal justice system to detain and incarcerate anyone who's involved, and they did it in double quick time. And yet Rudy Cabana, who was the perpetrator of the crimes in Southport, is yet to face trial. I mean, the whole thing is just gone, you know, belly up. And I think Daniel's absolutely right to make the point that this is systemic across the country. This is not from one local authority to another. This is across boundaries, and you will only get a proper analysis if you look at the systemic failure that's taking place. You can't do that if you look at it on a local basis. And the way that you set the terms of reference basically make it impossible, as you've also indicated, Jonathan, not having the right to compel witnesses to come forward. I mean, if you don't have that right, you're not going to make any progress, full stop. I mean, frankly, this discussion starts and ends on that point, doesn't it?
I completely agree with you. And Daniel, out of interest, obviously, we've seen the Labour Party say we don't need a national inquiry. They've now made a step, albeit a tiny one, into doing something in order to try and hope that the heat will get taken off them. Do you think we'll eventually see some capitulation here? Because surely this doesn't end well for the government, that they think this is over. No way is Elon Musk, I think, going quiet on this. Do you think there should be a national inquiry? And do you think someone like Stoke-on-Trent, at the very least, should be given the finances to hold their own local one at the very least, so we can shine a light on if there's anything going on in that great city?
Yes, absolutely. But that's where it comes down to, isn't it? It's got to be a national inquiry. And they've already taken that step now to say, oh, well, because of pressure, we'll have some local inquiries. So they're only probably a few weeks or a couple of months away from announcing a national inquiry.
Does it shock you that this Labour Party is being dragged into a national inquiry on an issue that surely, when they've had bad headline after bad headline, this would be the easiest win of all, just to say, we're going to have a national inquiry, we want to unearth what's been going on, and we'll prosecute aggressively those who take place, just like Keir Starmer was happy to prosecute those who said some very unsavoury things on social media, but ultimately it was on social media and was not responsible for the actions of others who chose to commit awful violence on the streets in places like Stoke-on-Trent over the summer. Yes,
and I think it shows the incompetency of the current government, really. I don't think things are going to get any better anytime soon.
Now, Ben, I'm glad you brought up the Attorney General, because I was gobsmacked when he was grilled, I think it was by Sir Ashley Fox, a Conservative Member of Parliament, in a select committee, who was asking him about his business dealings with Gerry Adams. As you said, we are now seeing Labour repeal legislation that I actually was working on with Sir Brandon Lewis in the Northern Ireland office that would protect our veterans from vexatious claims. And what's going to happen instead is we're going to give cuts to granny and cash to people like Gerry who have committed these awful crimes. Do you think it is an absolute abomination, first of all, that we're allowing our British veterans to be risked? And do you also agree with me that it's wholly unfair? It looks dodgy, as far as I'm concerned. It looks uncomfortable that the Attorney General, who was the client lawyer for Gerry Adams, who made, I think now it's been reported in the Times, £30,000 from being his lawyer, is going to be part of the same cabinet that chooses to revoke this legislation that would financially benefit Gerry Adams himself. It doesn't look great, does it?
I think it's repugnant. I mean, for those of us who lived through the Troubles, and obviously the Troubles were prevalent in London the way that they were bombing London, you know, we all know the victims got no compensation. Our soldiers were hauled through the courts and continue to be hauled through the courts. And yet sections 46 and 47, which removed the ability for people like Gerry Adams to claim compensation, because, I mean, there's a technicality. I don't know if you've looked at it in detail. The reason Gerry Adams can, on prima facie, claim compensation is because it wasn't the Secretary of State that ordered his detention. It was another minister in government. The fact is he was lawfully detained, and you were right as the Conservative government to make sure that people like him couldn't use that technicality to make a compensation claim. And now Labour have homed in on those two sections, those very sections that you correctly put in as a Conservative government to prevent that from happening, to revoke them. Again, another example of basically a politicized approach to criminal justice. Gerry Adams is an enemy of the United Kingdom. At no level can I make any case for compensation for Gerry Adams, or indeed anyone in the IRA. And I find it, while I'm on this topic, absolutely repugnant that neither Michelle O'Neill nor Mary Lou McDonald will condemn the IRA. That even now we have a First Minister in Northern Ireland who will not condemn terrorism. Absolutely unbelievable. What a state of affairs the United Kingdom has come to, that one of its first ministers, by the way, I would abolish devolution, but one of its first ministers would not denounce the IRA. Outrageous. And now to be giving Jerry Adams the ability to get compensation, Hermer should be sacked. And I just want to say one more thing. Kemi Badenoch, we haven't mentioned her. Actually, Elon Musk shone a light on this, but it's Kemi who's really brought the importance of a national inquiry into the public psyche. She's the one who's been saying, we need a national inquiry. And she's won that debate. And I think it's her first significant victory as leader of the opposition.
No, I totally agree with you on that particular point with Kemi. I think it was a huge victory for her. And ultimately, I would also say this. I'm really proud and want to say thank you, Ben, for all your passion that you show for Northern Ireland. It's an issue that's close to my heart due to my own family. It's also an issue close to my heart, having served in the Northern Ireland office as a parliamentary private secretary. And it's an important part of our union. I was proud to vote against the Winter Framework, which makes a mockery of Northern Ireland by by drawing a line in the Irish Sea between England, Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, which allows the EU a backdoor to try and introduce their ridiculous rules and regulations, which is still being beholden upon the United Kingdom. And I want to say, as someone who's a proud unionist, thank you for what you do, for standing up on an issue that I think many people would say most people aren't interested in. But if they're not interested in it, they don't understand the damage it will do if we don't retain Northern Ireland's place in our precious union.